Get this lightweight out of my simulator. Can it even see out of the damn helmet? The voice of Gunnery Sergeant Croft boomed across the sterile white floor of the advanced simulation hangar, a cavernous space that smelled of ozone and chilled air. The assembled group of younger pilots, all broad-shouldered and radiating the cocksure energy of youth, chuckled nervously. Their laughter was a brittle, echoing sound, an offering to the altar of Croft's ego. The figure in the center of their attention remained motionless. She was small, encased in the sleek, graphite-colored exoskeleton of the Chimera flight suit, a next-generation interface that looked more alien than military. Her helmet was a smooth, featureless ovoid of polarized chrome, reflecting the hangar's harsh lights and the distorted, sneering face of the sergeant. He took a deliberate step forward, his heavy combat boots striking the side of her helmet with a dull, percussive thud. It wasn't a hard kick, not enough to cause injury, but it was something far worse, an act of profound, public contempt. A gesture that said, "You're not a person, you are an object in my way." She didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. Her posture remained unchanged, a perfect column of stillness, her gloved hands resting calmly at her sides. The only movement was the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, visible in the subtle expansion of the suit's articulated plates. But deep within the command network, a silent, encrypted flag was tripped. A signal buried in a subprotocol of the suit's diagnostic software, designed to report unauthorized kinetic impacts, now pulsed its way out of the hangar, across the base, and into the secure servers of a very, very different command structure. If you believe that true strength is measured not in volume, but in composure, type silence in the comments below. Sergeant Croft circled her like a predator, his voice dripping with theatrical sarcasm. "What's the matter, Ghost? Cat got your tongue? Or did the quartermaster just send us an empty suit to fill a diversity quota?" He gestured grandly to the assembled pilots. "See this, gentlemen? This is what happens when the brass gets more interested in appearances than in warfighting. They send us these placeholders. Not a single identifying mark, no unit patch, no name tag. Just a ghost in the machine." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp meant for everyone to hear. "I bet there's nobody even in there." He was playing to his audience, reinforcing his status as the gatekeeper, the grizzled veteran who could sniff out weakness and inadequacy. The pilots, eager for his approval, nodded along. They saw what he wanted them to see: a small, anonymous figure, an anomaly in their world of rigid hierarchies and loud pronouncements of skill. They saw a problem to be removed, not a professional to be respected. Croft turned to the simulation console, a smirk plastered on his face. "All right, Ghost. You want to take the Chimera for a spin? Fine. Let's give you the ride of your life." His fingers danced over the holographic interface, his movements needlessly aggressive. He selected a scenario file codenamed Hades Descent. It was more than a test. It was a punishment. A Tier 1 failure cascade. A simulation so brutally difficult, so layered with catastrophic systems failures and overwhelming enemy opposition, that it was considered functionally unwinnable. Its purpose was to break pilots, to shatter their confidence, and send them home. "Let's see what you've got," Croft sneered as the polished door of the simulation pod hissed open, beckoning her into the darkness. "Try not to scratch the paint." The heavy door of the simulator sealed behind her with a solid, definitive thunk, plunging the world into darkness and silence. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the interior of the pod bloomed with light. A 360-degree holographic display flickered to life, creating a perfect, seamless illusion of a cockpit suspended in the blackness of high orbit. Below, the curve of the Earth was a breathtaking swirl of blue and white. Ahead, a swarm of red icons blinked into existence, representing a hostile carrier group. Her gloved hands, which had remained so still under Croft's abuse, now moved with an impossible, fluid grace. They didn't just touch the controls, they merged with them. Her fingers danced across the touch-sensitive surfaces, her movements economical, precise, and utterly devoid of hesitation. In the control room, the main screen showed her vital signs. Heart rate, a steady 62 beats per minute. Respiration, a calm, even rhythm. Croft scoffed. Probably flatlined already, but then the simulation began. A klaxon blared inside the pod. A synthesized voice announced, "Warning, multiple engine failures detected. Cascade failure in progress. Weapons systems offline." Red lights flashed across the holographic cockpit. On the tactical display, the enemy swarm began its attack run. This was the point where even the best pilots began to panic, where their training fought a losing battle against overwhelming sensory input and the certainty of failure. But the figure in the pod remained a portrait of absolute calm. Her head tilted slightly, as if listening to a distant song, and her hands began their real work. She wasn't fighting the failures. She was orchestrating them, turning a symphony of disaster into a masterpiece of control. In the stunned silence of the control room, they watched the telemetry data stream across the main screen, a river of numbers and symbols that made no sense. She was doing things that were not supposed to be possible. Instead of trying to restart the dead engines, she used the ship's final burst of momentum to execute a gravitational slingshot around a piece of orbital debris, a maneuver so precise that a deviation of a single millimeter would have sent her spiraling into the atmosphere. The hostile fighters, expecting a crippled and helpless target, overshot her position completely. With her main weapons offline, she rerouted auxiliary power from life support, a suicidal move, into a single, focused electromagnetic pulse, disabling the guidance systems of the lead enemy fighters and causing them to collide in a silent, brilliant flash of light. Her breathing never wavered. Croft stood frozen, his jaw slack, the color draining from his face. The pilots behind him had stopped breathing altogether, their eyes glued to the screen. The final phase of the simulation was a deadstick landing on a carrier deck during a Category 5 hurricane. With no power, she was essentially a falling rock. But she used the ship's control surfaces with surgical precision, riding the violent wind currents, bleeding off speed in a series of terrifying, perfectly controlled stalls. The simulation ended as the landing gear touched the deck with the gentle finality of a feather. A single number flashed on the screen, green and stark against the black background. Score, 100%. A perfect score. A score the system's designers had coded as a theoretical maximum, a statistical ghost that should never have appeared. The control room was utterly, deafeningly silent. "No," Croft whispered, the word a dry rattle in his throat. "That's not possible." The heavy blast doors at the far end of the hangar slid open with a deep, resonant hum, cutting through the tomb-like silence of the control room. 3 figures stood framed in the doorway, their silhouettes sharp and imposing against the bright corridor light. They wore service dress uniforms, and even from a distance, the constellation of stars on their shoulders was unmistakable. 1 3-star general, flanked by 2 2-stars. The air in the room instantly solidified. The gawking pilots snapped to a clumsy, panicked version of attention, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror. Sergeant Croft, who had been staring blankly at the perfect score on the screen, spun around, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into dread. The central figure, General Maddox, a man whose face looked like it was carved from granite, strode into the room. His steps were measured and silent, making no sound on the polished concrete floor. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept across the room, taking in the scene with a cold, analytical gaze. He did not acknowledge Croft. He did not look at the other pilots. His attention was fixed on a single point, the simulation pod, its door now hissing open to reveal the small, suited figure within. Maddox walked past Croft as if he were a piece of furniture, his presence so immense that it seemed to suck all the oxygen from the air around him. He stopped at the main console, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the impossible score displayed there. He looked at the helmet on the console, noting the faint, dusty scuff mark on its side. Then, his eyes settled on the woman as she stepped out of the pod, her movements still unhurried and deliberate. General Maddox's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or profound respect, softened his hard features for a barest instant. He turned back to the main console and, with a few swift, authoritative keystrokes, bypassed Croft's low-level security clearance. He pulled up a classified personnel file, its contents projecting onto the massive main screen for all to see. The silence in the room was now so absolute it felt like a physical pressure. The file header was simple, stark, and devastating. Designation: Major Evelyn Reed. Call sign: Ghost. Croft's derogatory nickname, thrown out as an insult, was in fact her official, legendary call sign. Below it, the accolades scrolled down the screen in a relentless, damning cascade. Unit: Advanced Weapons Development Group, Skunk Works Division. Primary specialty: Lead Test Pilot and Systems Architect, Project Chimera. They were standing in her laboratory. They were training on her machine. The list continued. Combat hours: 4000 plus classified. Awards: Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, Legion of Merit. The final line was the most crushing of all. Current status: active duty, Commander's discretionary oversight. She answered to no one below the Joint Chiefs. Major Reed reached up and, with a soft hiss of depressurizing seals, removed her helmet. Her face was calm, her expression neutral. She looked younger than they had imagined, but her eyes held a depth and wisdom that was timeless. General Maddox turned to face her, drew himself up to his full height, and rendered a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Major Reed," he said, his voice a low, respectful thunder. "My apologies for the unprofessional reception. I trust the diagnostic on the new failure cascade protocols was successful. The aftermath was not an explosion, but a quiet, efficient demolition. The story of what happened in Hangar 7 didn't just spread through the base. It detonated across the entire command structure. It became an instant legend, a cautionary tale whispered in barracks and briefing rooms. Sergeant Croft was not yelled at. He was not publicly dressed down. He was simply met by 2 grim-faced military police officers as General Maddox was leaving. They relieved him of his duties, his security clearance, and his career. He was gone within the hour, a ghost of a different kind, erased by the quiet competence he had so arrogantly dismissed. But the consequences didn't stop there. General Maddox saw the incident not as the failure of one man, but as a symptom of a deep, cultural sickness within the 77th Air Combat Wing, a culture that prized bravado over brilliance, volume over value. The entire training program was suspended indefinitely. The 3 generals weren't there just to witness a test. They were there to perform an institutional audit, and Croft's pathetic display had given them all the evidence they needed. The unit was effectively shut down, its command staff relieved, and its training doctrine scheduled for a complete, ground-up rewrite. The pilots who had laughed, who had been complicit in their silence, were each individually interviewed, their futures in the cockpit now hanging by a thread. They had failed the most important test of all, and it wasn't in the simulator. They had mistaken arrogance for strength and silence for weakness. It was a lesson none of them would ever forget. The legend of the Ghost of Hangar 7 became a foundational myth for the new generation of pilots. The Hades descent simulation was officially renamed the Reed Maneuver, and the recording of her perfect run became mandatory viewing for all trainees. They didn't just study her technical skill, they studied her composure. They watched the recording of Croft's boot striking her helmet. They saw her absolute stillness. They saw her walk into an impossible scenario and dismantle it with a calm that bordered on supernatural. The lesson was clear: your swagger means nothing here. Your voice means nothing. Your competence is your only currency. The scuffed helmet she had worn that day was retrieved from the locker room. It was cleaned, polished, and placed inside a glass display case at the entrance to the newly reconstituted training academy. There was no grand plaque explaining its significance, only a small, engraved plate with 3 words, competence is silent. Every pilot who walked through those doors, for decades to come, would see it. It served as a permanent, humbling reminder. It told them that the most formidable warrior they might ever meet might not be the one with the loudest voice or the most decorated uniform, but the quiet, unassuming professional standing right next to them, the one they were most likely to underestimate. Major Reed had not only proven her own worth, she had fundamentally redefined the very meaning of strength for an entire institution. Months later, the 77th was reborn. Its new commanding officer, a colonel handpicked by General Maddox, built a new culture around a single principle: humility. The hotshot culture was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. Instructors were selected for their ability to teach, not their ability to intimidate. Collaboration replaced competition, and occasionally, a small, unassuming woman in a simple flight suit would be seen walking the halls, observing the new trainees. It was Major Reed. She never spoke of the incident with Croft. She never had to. Her very presence was a living testament to the change she had brought about. She would sometimes stop and watch the new pilots in the simulators, offering a quiet word of advice, a small technical correction that would unlock a new level of performance. She mentored them not with speeches, but with her example. She taught them that true confidence requires no announcement. It is proven in the flawless execution of a task, in the calm focus under pressure, in the steady hand that guides the machine through the storm. Her legacy wasn't in the awards on her file or the impossible score on the screen. It was in the respectful silence of the new control room, in the focused intensity of the young pilots, and in the institutional understanding that the greatest strength is the one that doesn't need to be proven with words, because it is so overwhelmingly evident in action. True power is not the force of a boot against a helmet. It is not the volume of an insult hurled across a hangar floor. It is not the brittle authority built on fear and intimidation. True power is the deafening silence that follows an act of impossible skill. It is the unwavering calm in the heart of a manufactured storm. It is the quiet competence that dismantles arrogance, piece by piece, without ever raising its voice. The world is full of noise, of people shouting to be heard, demanding respect they have not earned. But legacy is not built on noise. It is forged in the quiet moments of supreme focus, in the disciplined pursuit of perfection, in a humble strength that allows deeds to speak for themselves. Major Evelyn Reed never sought validation. She simply was. And in being, she transformed everything around her. She taught an entire generation that respect is not taken by force. It is commanded by character, and that the most profound impact is often made by the one who has heard the least, but seen the most clearly. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where professionalism defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.